Welcome to Calf Academy, your source for calf care education.
The topic of this presentation is what's important on a calf operation. The outline for this presentation is 6 main topics. We're going to be talking about calf health and performance. In other words, how are we doing as an industry? The second topic is going to be about calf health. It all starts at calving, so what's important around the time the calf is born. The third topic is all about colostrum, how important it is and why we need to do it. Then we'll get into calf nutrition, additives, and then thoughts about the environment, both sanitation and ventilation. So we'll get started on calf health and performance. How are we doing? The calf facts are derived from the NOMS data. It's work that the USDA did to survey many farmers around the United States from 1991 to 2007. And recently we had some additional information come out in 2014. But what we can see in all these parameters, such as age at calving in months, is that it hasn't changed much over the years. If we look at stillbirths, for example, in 2007, it's 6.5% of the calves die before they're 48 hours old. In 2014, the number was 6.1% on the average of farms across the United States. So we've not made a great deal of progress on our calf health performance. The focus appears to be that we've been working mostly on keeping costs low. When we look at this NOMS data, we asked the producers what was their perceived cause of deaths on their farm due to either scours, diarrhea, or respiratory problems. And as you can see, the percentage of deaths coming from these different diseases over the years has stayed remarkably constant. How do we expect calves to grow from birth to 180 days? Well, the gold standard coming from Dairy Calf and Heifer Association is that they should double their birth weight in the first 60 days. From 61 to 120 days, 2.2 pounds average daily gain, and 121 to 180 days, 2 pounds average daily gain. I think most people are interested in that first 60 days, doubling the birth weight. Very achievable. Additional important items that we need to track on our calf raising operations are mortality and morbidity. Mortality, of course, is death, and morbidity is actually coming down with the disease that requires treatment. So death numbers, mortality numbers, first 60 days, less than 5%. It drops a lot after that, the remaining 61 to 120 days and 121 to 180 days of getting down to less than 1%. Scours morbidity, those calves that require a treatment, in the first 60 days, try and shoot for less than 25% of your herd having to be treated for scours. And then it drops precipitously after that, and as the calves get older and out of that scours period. Respiratory, that's a problem throughout the first 120 days. Less than 10% in the first 60 days, and from 61 to 120 days, less than 15%. Most of the morbidity for respiratory is going to come in that post-weaning period. When I think about calf raising, I think of those things that are going to impact the health, growth, and future productivity of calves the most. And of course, the obvious one of all is that we've got to get these calves born. We've got to give them colostrum. We've got to provide good nutrition. And we've got to make sure they're in a clean, dry, comfortable environment with good air. So of course, with calf health, it starts at calving. In the calving area, the facilities have got to be clean. After all, we're dealing with babies. Calves are out in a clean pasture with nice green grass. That's the ideal situation. But oftentimes we need to calve these babies out in pens, and the pen has to be clean. Good straw, cleaned out between animals if possible, out of the bad weather. It's always nice to have a good source of warm water in a place where we can clean up our instruments and have available supplies ready at hand if needed. Since the cow is going to be at a certain stage of having her calf, she has to be able to get up and lie down easily. We have to have good bedding in that area. And if we have to be able to help that animal, it's a good idea to have a hinged panel gate that we can move around, that we can easily restrain the animal if need be. It's nice to be able to have a head gate that we can catch up the animal in case we have to do some assistance in helping her give birth. I think it's a good idea to, have some protocols set up on your farm. We have to be able to say, especially we have hired employees, to be able to help them think through what are the things that are going to be important for us when we're bringing in these animals to calve. The springers, the first calf heifers, we need to bring those in the calving area long before their due date, because sometimes they can come early. So I'd like to see them come in 3 to 4 weeks before they're due. Somebody has to be assigned to observe for signs of calving throughout the day. That includes even in the evening. Labor typically will start when the water breaks, showing that the heifer is in first stages of her calving. The cows typically will let them go for an hour to 4 hours. Heifers may take a little bit longer, from 2 to 6 hours to make progress, but they should be making progress. When you don't see like things are moving along like they should, you may have to go in and examine the birth canal, make sure that the parts are coming, the calf is coming the way it should. You got to remember, you got to be clean. Always helps to maybe have somebody hold the tail off to the side, scrub up the back end of the cow with some disinfectant and some soap. Once again, be clean. And then go in with a sleeve and determine whether both legs are present, the head's present, or kind of deciding if there's something that you can handle yourself or if you're going to have to get some assistance. If you determine that there's no head and the calf is coming backwards, if you don't think you can handle it, call your veterinarian. Make sure that the cow is in an area where there's sufficient space to work. If you need to be able to tie the cow up to keep her restrained, tie her low to a post. And always remember, you pull when the cow is straining. As soon as the calf is born, make sure the calf is breathing. You can take a clean piece of straw and tickle inside their nose. One of the things that is recommended at the University of Wisconsin is you can take some ice water and actually dump it in their ear. It really gets their head shaken and causes the calf to take a deep breath. Make sure the calf is up and breathing and doing well. Check the cow make sure that she's okay. We're going to even check and see if there's another calf there in case she's having twins. Check the udder for colostrum, mastitis. Treat the calf's navel with an effective teat dip and identify the calf and make darn sure that it gets its colostrum. There are a number of supplies that you should have as part of your maternity stall setup. You need to have a rope halter, a tail rope or a twine to hold the tail over, comb to clean up the cow, good hose with nozzle with warm water, soap and buckets, lube, disinfectant, navel dip, a short chain and a long chain for different situations, and to have a calf puller that is readily available and is functioning properly. All right, now that we moved beyond the birthing process, let's go to the next important step is colostrum. This slide where it says colostrum, it's important, is kind of an understatement. Calves are born without any immunoglobulins in their system. So that means that the mother's colostrum, the first milk that comes from the cow, provides the sole source of IgGs, immunoglobulin G, to the calf, amongst other immunoglobulins as well. So that first milk from mother called colostrum becomes one of the most important things for the future livelihood and productivity of the calf. So we know that passive transfer is important. If we go back and look at data over the years, many different types of research trials, it shows that calves that receive adequate passive transfer, that is adequate colostrum, have reduced morbidity and reduced mortality. Fewer treatments for fewer deaths. They have improved growth rates and better feed efficiency. And those calves that receive good passive transfer have also been shown to have decreased age at first calving. In addition, they have an increased first and second lactation milk production. So those things that happen very early in that calf's life at birth, within 2 or 3 or 4 hours, have a huge impact on how that animal is going to perform as an adult. Well, when it comes to colostrum for the calf, timing is everything. It's got to be quick getting the colostrum from the cow, and it has to be quick providing the colostrum to the calf. Cows that are delayed when it comes to their milking to remove the colostrum, that should be done within a very short period of time. And on the graph shown from research in 2005, they showed that colostrum can decrease 20 to 40% in as little as 6 hours after calving. If we wait to milk the cow 4 to 6 hours or longer after calving, she either dilutes out that colostrum with additional milk, or she reabsorbs some of the immunoglobulins that are in the colostrum. Either way, we should milk that cow as quickly after calving as possible. The goal would be milking within 4 hours. So we know that we have to milk the cow quickly, but we also know that we have to provide the colostrum to the calf quickly, because as this graph shows, the efficiency of absorption, which is the AEA, that stands for apparent efficiency of absorption, decreases rapidly over the first 24 hours of age. The calf would do best if we could get that colostrum into the calf within the first 2 to 4 hours. This little video will demonstrate how the immunoglobulins, the IgG molecules, are absorbed into the bloodstream of the calf. What we see here is the inside of the intestine. Right alongside of it in red is the inside of the blood vessel, and the gap between the intestine and the blood vessel is wide open when the calf is first born, allowing these IgG particles and anything else that's in that colostrum to get absorbed in the bloodstream. So when those gaps in the intestine start closing up and the IgG cannot flow into the blood vessel any longer, that means that there's likely some IgG molecules that are still left within the intestine. They still have a benefit for the calf. They have what's called a localized enteric effect. So we have this systemic effect with the IgG being in the blood, but this local effect helps the IgG clean up any type of bacteria that might come into the intestine along with the colostrum. So the localized enteric effect really does do well for the calf as well. But it is very important that we get it into the bloodstream first and foremost. So we've talked about birth, we've talked about colostrum. Let's move on to nutrition. All right, let's get into calf nutrition basics. Calves are born monogastric. That means they have one stomach that does most of the digestion of their feed. In other words, they've got a real high capacity to drink milk and digest milk in the abomasum. So milk or milk replacer supplies the majority of their nutrition. That is until grain intake becomes enough to take over the nutritional needs. So in other words, over the growth of the calf and the development of the calf in the first 60 days or so, although milk is very important, we still have to think about developing the rumen. So the newborn calf stomach is about 60% of the stomach is abomasum. So it digests the milk proteins in the abomasum, and the little bit of starter that a newborn calf will eat will go to the rumen and start that rumen development. And when they become an adult, that rumen is about 80% of the stomach, makes up about 80% of the stomach. And the rumen, of course, is designed for digestion of forage, and the bacteria, protozoa, and all the other things that are in the rumen are designed to digest the forages. And so what we're really feeding is the bacteria that's in the rumen. So a calf has a very unique feature about their esophagus that will direct the milk that comes in its mouth to the abomasum. Normally, when a calf would drink water would go to the rumen, but milk has to go to the abomasum, and we do not want the milk to go to the rumen. If it goes to the rumen, then it has a tendency to be fermented there, which turns into kind of a bad thing for the calf. So when we provide milk to the calf, we either do it with a bottle, of course, or a bucket, and that suckling effect of drinking that milk causes that esophageal groove to close, diverting that milk over to the abomasum, thereby bypassing the rumen. And again, remember, when the calf drinks water, it does go to the rumen first. So what influences calf growth? Obviously, genetics has a major factor. We've got environmental things like, how cold and hot it is, what's the air quality, is the calf clean, dry, and comfortable? All those things impact calf growth. The health status of the animal certainly impacts calf growth. Then it has to do with colostrum status, what the vaccination program is. But probably one of the things that's most important is nutrition. And calves with good nutrition will grow very well, assuming all the other things are in place as well. But you can imagine if a calf has great nutrition, but a terrible environment, bad health, or even possibly poor genetics, the calf won't grow as well either. So we need all four things: genetics, good environment, healthy animal, and a good solid nutrition program. So a calf nutrition program is going to be made up of three areas: the liquid feed, whether it's milk or milk replacer, and that's going to be the major source of nutrition for the first 3 weeks or so. We're going to have calf starter. I really like people to get calf starter in front of the calves absolutely right away. And then, of course, water. Water is very, very important for rumen development and calf starter intake. So those three are essential components to the overall nutrition program. So if you feed whole milk to your calves, whole milk that comes straight out of your bulk tank, milk that you normally would be selling, there's some real advantages to that. One, it's readily available. It's a real high quality liquid feed. It's also high in fat and high in protein versus a typical conventional milk replacer. So on a dry matter basis, whole milk is going to be about 30% fat and 26% protein. That's a very substantial diet that's going to the young calf. In order to figure out that dry matter fat, you just divide the as fed fat and protein by the percent solids, and that'll give you the dry matter basis. So there's some disadvantages of whole milk feeding. Number one, it's expensive. The second thing is you have to keep in mind is there an alternative to feeding whole milk, which could be milk replacer. One way to do a quick rule of thumb on is it worthwhile to feed milk replacer or use the more expensive whole milk, take your mailbox price for your whole milk for 100 weight, multiply it by 4, and that's the price you would pay for 50 pounds of milk replacer. Because think of 100 pounds of milk at 12.5% solids, that's going to be 12.5 pounds of dry matter. So times that by 4, that's 50 pounds of dry matter. So that's a quick rule of thumb to tell you, is it better off using saleable milk or is it better off economically using milk replacer? So we've talked about saleable milk as being a good feed for calves, but it can be expensive. How about waste milk, the hospital milk, the antibiotic milk, the milk that you normally throw away, the milk that you cannot sell? What about that milk? That could be a very significant economic value for the farm. Because if we can make that milk so it's safe to feed to the calf and nutritious, could be a good economic advantage. The disadvantages of waste milk, oftentimes it has high bacteria counts. Some of those bacteria can be pathogens, introducing disease to the calves. The other thing we have to think about is that it's really quite inconsistent. Sometimes it could be transition milk, real high in solids. Sometimes it's mastitis milk, can be variable. Sometimes it's diluted with water. And then, of course, we have to think about antibiotic residues that may be in there. What impact are they going to have on the calf? And finally, a disadvantage, if anytime we're feeding waste milk, we have to pasteurize it. It is not a good thing to be able to feed this waste milk to baby calves that are most vulnerable for disease. So when we have that waste milk and we want to pasteurize, how do we go about doing that? Obviously we want to reduce the bacteria count to manageable levels. We want to kill the pathogenic organisms like yonis. So pasteurization isn't free. There's a significant upfront investment. It requires a lot of management. Both you have to set up for storage before we pasteurize, storage after we pasteurize, and we have to make sure that the pasteurizer is always working right and that it's doing the job that it's supposed to do. management of the pasteurizer is a major job for people, and failure of the pasteurization process can be fairly common. And remember, even though the milk is pasteurized, the antibiotic residues are still present. Bob James from Virginia Tech had looked at quality of incoming milk across the country, and the trends were the same as far as the ranges of bacteria in the milk, as low as 6,000 CFUs per mil up to 1 billion CFUs per mil. So the wide range of bacteria that's in the pre-pasteurized milk. Likewise, with the fat and protein that's in that milk, wide variation across the country, all the way from 1.2% fat all the way up to 12.1% fat. So there can be quite a considerable variation in nutrients that are coming to the calf. Because of this nutrient variation and high bacteria counts and the need to do a good job of pasteurizing, a lot of people look at milk replacer, colostrum replacer as a real advantage. One that they don't have to put as management effort into and help avoid problems like Johne's disease, where that may be a big problem in certain herds. Same is true for leukemia virus and other respiratory diseases that farms may want to really try to avoid by not feeding that hospital milk. So when we're looking at milk replacers, there's certain things that we have to think about. What kind of protein and fat are in the milk replacer? How much of the milk replacer are we going to feed per kid per day? What kind of medications do we have in there? Do we have antibiotics? Do we have coccidiostats? And finally, there's a wide variety of different other types of additives that we could put in milk replacer that can certainly help the animals, but they can also add some cost. So the number one thing that people typically will think about with their milk replacer is what type of protein is in the milk replacer. And it's very common for people to say it's an all milk protein. Although that's the ideal situation, we can also add animal plasma. Animal plasma is very well digested by calves, and it has the advantage of bringing in what's called functional proteins. So milk proteins, animal plasma can be ideal components of milk replacer. There's some plant proteins that we can bring into milk replacer as well that can work fairly well. One of those is soy protein isolate. Another is soy protein concentrate. There's a modified soy flour that works fairly well. And wheat gluten in certain situations will work fairly well. There's a couple different ingredients that it's probably good to avoid, and that would be soy flour and egg protein. And I want to just point out that the soy flour and modified soy flour are two different types of products. So always watch out for the designation of the modified soy flour, which can be an acceptable type of ingredient for their protein value. The University of Minnesota looked at some comparisons of the different types of ingredients in milk replacer, and they compared an all milk 2020 to an all milk soy protein concentrate combination and a all milk wheat gluten combination, where 50% of the all milk protein was replaced by either the soy or the wheat. And as you can see in the graph, that there was about a 90% decrease in average daily gain on these studies when we looked at the plant proteins that were added to that milk replacer. And as you can see, the starter intake, for those two products with the plant proteins was also slightly decreased. So when we put together a milk replacer feeding program, we usually think of it in three different levels. One is of the conventional program, or more of a moderate type of program, or what's oftentimes called an intensive calf feeding program. The conventional program typically has protein and fat at around 20% and is typically fed from anywhere from a pound to a pound and a half of dry matter per calf per day. What this program will do is really allow the calf to maximize starter intake. Calves will eat a lot more dry grain on this type of a program However, the calves will not grow quite as well because you're minimizing the nutrients from the milk component. The middle of the road, typically 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of dry matter per calf per day. You'll use a higher protein, usually at 22 to 26%, and your fat level will be around that 16 to 20% fat. There you'll get a moderate starter intake and, moderate growth from the milk replacer. The intensive system usually has a typically higher crude protein. Fat's about the same, but you're feeding 2 to 3 pounds of dry matter per calf per day. There you'll maximize the growth through the highly nutritious milk replacer or whole milk, and you end up struggling to get calves to eat enough starter intake. The weaning program becomes way more challenging when you feed the intensive type of program. When we look at the amount of energy and the amount of protein that is available within a milk replacer, we can predict the gain that will come from the energy and predict the gain that will come from the protein. And where those two predictions intersect, that's the most efficient use of the nutrients. So you're not overfeeding or underfeeding either protein or energy. In the example on this page, it looks like the 1.25 pound feeding rate of a 2020 milk replacer to a 100-pound calf at 68 degrees Fahrenheit results in roughly, it looks like 0.6, 0.7 pounds average daily gain. Typical type of outcome that you'd get with this type of feeding plan. As you can see, if we would feed a 2020 milk replacer out at 1.88 or 2.25 pounds of dry matter, we would be overfeeding energy by a lot and obviously underfeeding protein. So we would only get the gain that we'd get from protein because we wouldn't have enough protein to support any higher gain, certainly not as much as there would be available for the energy. So in this slide, we're looking at a 2220 milk replacer fed to a 100-pound calf at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. In here, we look at the efficiency of gain, where the amount of gain coming from energy and from protein is the same. That looks like it happens at around 1.75, 1.7 pounds of dry matter fed per day, and looks like the predicted gain that we'd have on that is upwards around 0.8 pounds of average daily gain. So you can see to increase your efficiency by increasing the amount of protein in the milk replacer gives you an advantage that the efficiency happens at a higher feeding rate and higher average daily gain. Now, when we look at even a higher feeding rate with a 2418 milk replacers as an example, we can feed upwards of, it looks like about 1.6 pounds of dry matter per day, and that's going to give us well over a pound of average daily gain. And you can see that efficiency level happens at a quite higher level when we can increase that protein in relationship to the fat. And if we look out at that area around 2.25 pounds per day of dry matter, even there, the amount of predicted gain from protein and fat is still pretty close together. It's pretty close to the same. And certainly likewise at 1.5 and 1.88 where the arrows are showing. So we've got quite a range of efficiency of gain with that type of milk replacer that's, in this example, a 2418. This is a good way to be able to evaluate. If you know what type of milk replacer you have, you can tell you how much feed of it you should be giving per day to get the most benefit out of that milk replacer. Now in this example, we're feeding a 2818. And as you can see in this example, we've got lots of protein. The protein line, the dark blue line, is higher above the fat line the entire way. And in this example, you could make the case that you're actually underfeeding energy throughout the whole range of amount fed. Even out to 2.25 pounds of dry matter, you're going to predict a 2-pound average daily gain. And although those two are fairly close together, you can speculate that perhaps a 28-20 would be a better choice and providing a little bit more energy to this 100-pound calf at 68 degrees outside temperature. This is a summary of a study that was done at the University of Minnesota that compared a conventional feeding program to a more intensive feeding program and looked at what the average daily gains and what the production would have been out of first lactation. Now in this slide it sets up what the feeding program looks like. And you can see there was a conventional program of a 20-20 in the green, fed at 1.25 pounds per day for the first 35 days, and then it was cut in half for the next 7 days. And then there was a moderate program, a 28-16, that was fed at 1.5 pounds, 1.5 pounds of dry matter for the first 35 days, and then half that amount for the remaining 7 days. And then the accelerated program started out as 1.5 pounds per day for the first 10 days, went up to 2.25 pounds up to 42 days, and then cut back from the last 7 days to, half of what the maximum amount was, or 1.125 pounds per day, 1 time a day. So this was the feeding schedule for this research program. On the next slide, we'll look at what the results were for these feeding programs. So when we looked at the results from the conventional, moderate, and accelerated feeding programs, you can see that calves that are fed more gain more, and that shows up significant differences in days 1 to 42 and in days 1 to 56. When we looked at body weight in the grower phase, those calves showed a difference, but the difference wasn't as significant as it was during the pre-weaning phase. You can see at 8 weeks the difference between the conventional at 170 pounds and the accelerated at 189 pounds, and then out at 6 months, 447 versus 466 at the conventionally fed calves. When these calves on these 3 different programs entered in the first lactation, their differences were only significant in one area, and that was the age at calving, where the conventional animals calved at 745 days and the accelerated animals calved at 717 days. All other numbers in this chart were not significantly different. However, when you look at the pounds of milk from conventional to accelerated, the accelerated animals did produce 1,583 additional pounds. However, again, this difference was not statistically significant. All right, let's get into a discussion about calf supplements, and we'll give you an example of how to make a good decision on a calf supplement. As you can see on this slide, there are a wide variety of different supplements that you can provide to calves, literally dozens of different things that you can add to their milk or milk replacer. So how are we going to make up our mind? One of the things you really need to think about is what's going to be the return on your investment in a supplement. How much money you're going to pay for the supplement and what kind of return are you going to get back. And the best way to be able to judge that is what kind of research is out there, or for some supplements it may be one of those things that people have a good experience using a product in the field. And finally, it's got to be easy to use. If it's expensive, hard to get into the calf, and there's not much research, your decision is easy. On the other hand, if there's good proof and good research, and it's something you can just add to your feed, and the research tells you it's got a good outcome, it becomes an easy decision. Let's use animal plasma as an example of an additive that's been well researched, has a good return, and is easy to use. So when we add plasma to milk replacer, or CMR, calf milk replacer, the change in the milk replacer is nearly undetectable. It's not going to change the color, it's not going to change the aroma to any degree, It's not going to change the solubility to any degree. The one thing that we do have to know, as far as ease of use, that we should not mix with very hot water. Do not get the water up to 150 degrees Fahrenheit because it will cause the functional proteins within the plasma to denature, and that's not a very good thing. So you can see that there's 78% crude protein in plasma, and of course it's very low in moisture, relatively low in ash. So when we look at plasma, research shows that there's fewer loose stools, and that's the observation on farms as well. There's an improvement in morbidity and mortality. Lots of trials have been completed, and some of them available in peer-reviewed publications. Adding spray-dried plasma to milk replacer can sometimes save money, sometimes as much as $1 to $2 per bag. Other times it costs more. That market is quite variable. 1/3 to 40% of the milk replacers made in the United States contain plasma. So it's a very commonly used ingredient. Western markets probably use more than other parts of the country. And in large herds out west, they clearly see the health benefits and the savings by adding plasma to milk replacer. The criteria to judge these plasma milk combination milk replacers, they're typically compared to all milk. And as you look at the different summaries shown in this slide, there is a preponderance of improvement in the different parameters that are viewed. So plasma is well accepted as a positive addition to milk replacer. And sometimes when we say that a milk replacer is an all milk and it has plasma in it, that's still a positive feature of the milk replacer. So there have been several disease challenge studies using plasma in milk replacer, looking at crypto, E. coli, coronavirus, lots of positive effects on adding plasma to milk replacer. The final segment of our calf raising discussion is going to be about the environment that the calf lives in. In the first section we're going to look at in the environment area is sanitation. So let's discuss 5 ideas that really work when it comes to reducing pathogen load. So we can look at the area in milk replacer storage, cleaning and sanitizing equipment storage, all in, all out housing, organization of your tools and the operation, and employee training. All of these are ideas around reducing the load of pathogens that the animal's exposed to. When we store milk replacer on the farm, if you don't use a full bag a day, it's a good idea to be able to put your milk replacer inside a container where it can stay clean and where it can stay dry. Garbage cans work very well for this, and that you can put a lid on them and allows you to feed out of that container till it's empty, and it's a good idea to have a second container that you can use while the first one is being cleaned and sanitized. You should really avoid those cans that don't have lids or liners in them, or something that you could just protect the milk replacer from just exposure to the environment that the barrel is kept in. So clean, sanitize, keep your equipment dry. Sometimes people will use a washing machine to clean the rubber nipples. It's always a good idea to be able to check and make sure that you're doing the right kind of job. Soaking bottles, nipples really isn't something that works very well. When you put together your cleaning and sanitation plan, make sure you have the right kind of equipment and that it's easy to use, it's easy to access. Have things like bottle racks, have a sink that really works well for you in cleaning, and again, make sure the cleaners and disinfectants are easy to get your hands on, easy to measure for the right amounts. When you get the things clean, get them ready for the next feeding, store them in a way where they're going to stay clean and that it's going to be easy to keep them dry. The example on the left is where you can stack up your buckets on top of one another so they have good air movement between the buckets. Would be a good idea. In this example, the bottom row of buckets that is sitting right on the floor, it might be a good idea to get them off the directly off the floor and have some kind of a surface underneath there that allows airflow. Another good thing to do maybe with that lower rack tier of buckets is to actually use a towel and dry them before you set them upside down on the floor. And obviously soaking buckets between feedings is not a good idea. Buy some inexpensive shelving or build some shelving that works really well for storing nipples, bottles, anything like that. There again, we're focusing in on having good airflow and making things easy to get clean, stay clean, and dry quickly. Avoid methods that don't allow the air to fully get inside the bottle and help things dry out. In the example of the picture on the right, the nipple would cause the bottle to not evaporate out the water quite as well. An example of using a towel to dry the interior of the bottles in this situation may be an effective measure as well. Here's a good example of an inexpensive storage system that one farmer developed to keep everything up off the ground. Great system, inexpensive way to store bottles and nipples. So here's two examples of using a hutch or the calf crate type of system that you commonly see out west, where you can have an all-in, all-out housing. Calves are going to be, for the most part, all by themselves and not exposed to the pathogens of other calves, and it allows you to clean out very well between calves. Key point is make sure you clean out very well between individual calves going into these types of structures. So when you use hutches, it's really quite easy to eliminate the nose-to-nose contact, especially the nose-to-nose contact with older animals. These individual hutches are thought to be the gold standard of being able to house young animals like calves. The bedding can be clean and dry and plentiful. They're typically well ventilated, and it's real easy to keep the separation from the very young calves from the older calves. So in a building that has calves that come in and houses multiple age groups, design the movement of calves in the building so you always do everything from the young to the old. Includes feeding, moving calves, cleaning pens. Think through the ways that you can always work in the facility like this from the young calves to the older calves. This picture shows an example of a well-organized mixing area. Seems to have everything in its place, things hung up so they dry well, and overall this room looks fairly well organized and clean. Be organized so when you go out to feed calves, you can do it quickly and efficiently. Have systems where you don't have the nipples getting dirty while you're moving them, being able to make it easy for your workers to quickly and easily and efficiently feed the animals. So the 5 ideas that really work to reduce the pathogen load: milk replacer storage containers, clean and sanitize equipment, proper storage of equipment, all-in, all-out housing, and be well organized. 5 good ideas. So the next section in the environment, we're going to be talking about ventilation. So our ventilation goals for the winter: in most climates, we should shoot for 4 air changes per hour without a draft. That is a standard that was put together for a long time, but it's most recently been promoted by the University of Wisconsin with their positive pressure ventilation systems. That allows us to maximize air hygiene, manage the stress that we might see with warmer weather. We need to still provide adequate bedding for nesting in cold weather, and we always have to have the correct amount of pen space per calf. This picture is an example of a barn that has natural ventilation. This is a calf barn at the University of Minnesota in Waseca, Minnesota. And it has a curtain to regulate the amount of air that comes into the calves. This is a 2-row barn and does an excellent job of providing good natural ventilation to this group of calves. The barn is very narrow, so they take maximum advantage of the outside air and good ventilation. Some farms decide that they're going to have a combination of a negative pressure system. That means where you exhaust the air out of the building, and then they bring in fresh air using the positive pressure tubes. The design of this type of a structure is a little bit more difficult to balance the exhaust with the air coming in with the positive pressure tubes, but they can be very effective to maintain a level of fresh air in the buildings for the calves. The calf pens in this picture, there's two groups of calves here fed with an auto feeder. And this barn is set up with a negative pressure system. You can see the two fans in the far wall in this picture. The intake for the air coming in is behind the person taking this photograph. So the air does a nice job of moving across the entire two pens and does a really very nice job of ventilating this calf barn. So the University of Wisconsin has done a lot of really great work developing tools to be able to provide fresh air continuously into calf facilities with a positive pressure system. The calculator that they developed is shown on the right, and what it does is it takes the dimensions of the barn and matches the proper fan to the size of the barn. And then the tube is developed to attach to the size of the fan. And then the hole diameter, positions, and spacing on the tube is what gets matched to the calves in their pens. So barn dimensions are very important. Getting the right kind of calculations out of this very sophisticated spreadsheet does a really nice job of getting the right air changes per hour at the calf level without a draft. Respiratory issues can be a real struggle on calf operations. Oftentimes in facilities, like was shown in the picture, these calves have nose-to-nose contact on each side of their pens and in with the calves adjacent to the pens and in behind them. Sometimes these barns are so heavily stocked, there's a lot of manure and a lot of urine, and the barns are wide. It makes it difficult for natural ventilation to completely and adequately ventilate a barn like this. So when we have poor ventilation and poor air movement, lots of dust in the air, really close proximity of animals to one another, and especially to older animals, and if you couple that with poor immunity that comes from colostrum, it creates a real issue of higher levels of respiratory disease on the farm. You know, the poor immunity, not only from poor colostrum program, but in some cases even over-vaccinating can result in poor immunity because you put a lot of stress on the calf. Poor nutrition, coupling up a lot of stressful situations like dehorning, castrating, vaccinating, weaning, moving calves, all can contribute to calves with lower levels of immunity. The University of Wisconsin has also done some very good work with being able to assess respiratory disease risk. The things they look at are the amount of bacteria that's actually in the air that the calf is exposed to. The way the pens are set up is there physical barriers between calves. In other words, can the calves have nose-to-nose contact? And the third item they looked at was nesting score. Nesting score of 1, where the calf has virtually no bedding. Score of 3, where they have very deep nesting, where the calf's legs are not even visible. And of course the 2 is somewhere in between. This graph put together by the University of Wisconsin probably is one of the most effective ways to describe the major impacts you can have on decreasing the prevalence of respiratory disease. So in the slide on the left-hand side, you can see the percentage of cases of respiratory disease. And along the x-axis, we look at the amount of airborne bacteria that a calf would be exposed to. So let's look at the very top line where we have the round circles. In that line, what it's showing in the far right side of the graph near the arrow where it says the nesting score is 1, and it does not have a solid barrier, and there is very high airborne bacteria counts. So animals that have those situations are going to have a very high prevalence of respiratory disease. So we can take that down slightly by making a nesting score of 2. So going from the open circles to the open triangles and leaving the airborne bacteria the same, we can improve the risk for respiratory disease slightly. But if you notice, going down to a nesting score of 1 and adding a solid barrier markedly decreases the respiratory disease that a calf would be exposed to by just making sure that they don't have nose-to-nose contact. So let's look at the dark circles, the closed circles at high bacteria levels, and we follow that set of information down to really low bacteria levels in the air, and we'll notice that our prevalence of respiratory disease is practically nothing. We can decrease it a little bit by increasing our nesting score to 2 or 3. So this information just goes to show that if we do something about nesting scores, we add in a solid barrier, and we decrease the airborne bacteria, those are the best chances that we have to improve the risk that an animal would have for respiratory disease on a farm. So just to summarize, if we have adequate bedding, make sure the calves can nest, solid dividers, which prevent or limit nose-to-nose contact, and have an airflow at the calf level to reduce the airborne bacteria. In other words, what we're trying to do is dilute out the airborne bacteria. And the way we do that is with positive pressure ventilation system. Just to restate, because it's very important, management considerations to think about is the improvement in air quality, no nose-to-nose contact, and do what you can to eliminate contact with those older animals. There's some excellent resources for calf raisers and other people that work with calf raisers shown in this slide. Calf Notes by Jim Quigley is an excellent resource. The work at the Dairyland Initiative at University of Wisconsin is another one. And of course, Dairy Calf and Heifer Association has their website with a lot of good information. And then Dairy Herd Management provides a good resource that captures a lot of new and relevant information.
Thank you for completing this Calf Academy course. If you have follow-up questions, please contact your Milk Products National Account Manager